In the dying light of August, when the corn stood taller than a man's prayers, Tyson Beck heard a sound that would haunt him longer than any ghost: the quiet, desperate weeping of a woman burying her own heart, the shovel bit into the dry earth. With a hollow thunk that carried across Tyson's land like a funeral bell. He'd been mending fence posts near the cornfield's edge when the sound reached him, strange and sorrowful in the evening stillness. At first, he thought it might be the wind playing tricks through the stalks, but wind didn't sob. Wind didn't whisper broken apologies to the dust. Tyson Beck had lived alone on this stretch of Colorado territory for 7 years, ever since the fever took his Martha and left him with nothing but endless sky and the weight of silence. He'd grown accustomed to the loneliness, even made peace with it. The days blurred together in a rhythm of work and solitude, feeding the cattle, tending the crops, watching the seasons turn from his porch each evening. But this sound, this raw, human grief, it pulled at something he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. He set down his hammer and wire cutters, brushing the sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve. The August heat still pressed down even as sunset painted the mountains purple, and the corn rustled restlessly, as if the earth itself was stirring from a long sleep. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark called its lonesome song, and the familiar ache of twilight settled over the valley like a shroud. Following the sound deeper into the maze of stalks, Tyson moved carefully, his boots quiet on the packed earth between the rows. The weeping grew clearer now, punctuated by the scrape of metal against stone. Someone was digging. Out here, in the heart of his cornfield, where no soul had any business being. The corn towered around him, green walls that muffled the world beyond, creating a cathedral of shadows and whispered secrets. When he finally glimpsed her through the curtain of leaves, his breath caught in his throat. She knelt beside a small hole, her dark hair falling loose from its pins like spilled ink against her pale neck. Her blue dress, once fine enough for a drawing room, was now stained with earth and tears, the delicate fabric torn at the sleeves from her desperate flight through the wilderness. In her hands, she held something wrapped in white cloth, small and precious and heartbreaking in its careful tenderness. A young woman, maybe 25, with the kind of beauty that spoke of eastern cities and soft living. Yet here she was, alone and grieving in the wilderness like some fallen angel cast down from heaven. "Miss?" Tyson's voice came out rougher than he intended, startling her so badly she nearly dropped her burden. She spun toward him, her eyes wide with terror and something deeper, a wild, desperate look of someone who'd been pushed beyond all endurance. Those eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and turbulent, and they held secrets that made his chest tighten with unexpected recognition. He'd seen that look in his own mirror in the months after Martha's death, the hollow stare of someone who'd lost everything that mattered. "Please," she whispered, clutching the wrapped bundle to her chest like a shield against the world's cruelties. "Please don't make me stop. I have to. I have to lay it to rest." Tyson stepped closer, his hands raised in a gesture of peace, moving slow and gentle as he would with a spooked horse. The evening light caught the tears on her cheeks, making them gleam like scattered diamonds. "Easy now. I'm not here to stop anything. This is my land, is all." "Name's Tyson Beck." He nodded toward the small grave she'd been digging, no bigger than what might hold a beloved pet or a child's treasure. "What needs burying?" The question seemed to break something inside her. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, leaving tracks in the dust that coated her skin, and her shoulders shook with the force of grief too long contained. "My heart," she said simply, the words falling like stones into still water. "My faith, everything I believed in." Her voice carried the faint accent of Virginia refinement, cultured and educated, but it was cracked now, weathered by whatever storm had brought her to this desolate place. "And your name?" "Mira." She hesitated, as if even her name was a secret, worth guarding, something that might be used against her. Mira Travers. The name meant nothing to him, but the pain in her voice meant everything. Tyson had heard that particular note of anguish before, in his own throat, in the dark months after Martha's passing when he'd howled his grief to the empty sky. It was the sound of someone whose world had crumbled, leaving them to pick through the ruins alone, searching for pieces worth saving. "Miss Travers," he said gently. removing his hat in a gesture of respect that his mother had beaten into him years ago. Whatever's brought you to my cornfield in the middle of nowhere, whatever's hurt you so deep you think burying it's the only way. Well, maybe there's another path. Maybe what's broken can be mended. She laughed, but it held no humor. Only the bitter edge of someone who'd learned that fairy tales were lies told to keep little girls quiet. Another path? Mr. Beck, I've walked every path. I've prayed every prayer. I've believed every promise. She held up the bundle, and he could see now that it was a small wooden box, painted white with tiny blue flowers that matched her eyes. A jewelry box, maybe, or something meant to hold a child's most precious treasures. This held my mother's ring, she continued, her voice steadying with the resolve of someone who'd made an irreversible decision. The ring I was supposed to wear when I married Ronan Vega next month. The ring that would make me mistress of the grandest ranch in 3 counties and the envy of every woman from here to Denver. Her mouth twisted with disgust that transformed her beauty into something fierce and terrible. The ring that was supposed to buy my father's gambling debts and my family's honor with my body and my soul. Tyson felt his jaw tighten and his hands curl into fists. He'd heard of Ronan Vega, a man who collected land, cattle, and people with equal ruthlessness, who smiled in church on Sundays and left broken lives in his wake the rest of the week. The kind of man who saw everything, including women, as property to be acquired and used until it broke. But you ran. I discovered what kind of man I was meant to marry. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper, as if speaking the truth too loudly might summon the devil himself. What he did to the last woman who tried to refuse him. What he plans to do to this entire valley once he owns enough of it to control the water rights and the railroad route. She met Tyson's eyes, and he saw, steel beneath the sorrow, a core of strength that all her tears couldn't wash away. So yes, I ran. And I brought nothing with me but this box and the clothes on my back and the knowledge that will likely get me killed. But as Mira began to shovel earth over her treasure with shaking hands, the sound of hoofbeats echoed from the direction of the main road. Too many horses, moving too fast, and heading straight for the Beck Ranch with the urgency of hunters who'd caught a scent. Tyson's blood turned to ice water in his veins. He'd lived on the frontier long enough to know the difference between a social call and a hunting party, and those hoofbeats carried the rhythm of men with violent purpose. 6 horses, maybe 7, moving in formation like soldiers or hired guns. The kind of riders who didn't knock politely on doors. Get down, he whispered urgently, dropping to his knees beside Mira. Don't move, don't breathe loud, don't do anything that might catch their attention. Her face had gone white as fresh snow, and her hands trembled as she clutched the small shovel. It's him, isn't it? He's found me already. The words came out in a rush of terrified breath. I should have known I couldn't outrun Ronan Vega. He owns half the territory, as men in every town from here to the Kansas border. Maybe not, Tyson said, though his gut told him otherwise. He peered through the corn stalks toward his cabin, where lamplight flickered yellow in the windows. The riders were closer now, close enough that he could hear the jingle of spurs and the creak of leather saddles. Could be anyone. Drifters looking for work, neighbors with news. But even as he spoke the reassuring words, he knew they were lies. Honest men didn't ride in armed groups after sunset, and the purposeful way those horses moved spoke of men who knew exactly where they were going and what they intended to find. The hoofbeats stopped abruptly at his front gate, and Tyson heard the distinctive sound of his porch steps groaning under heavy boots. Multiple sets of them. His cabin door, solid oak that he'd hung himself, rattled under what sounded like the butt of a rifle. Beck, the voice that bellowed across the evening. Air was rough as gravel and twice as sharp. Tyson Beck, we know you're in there, so don't make this harder than it needs to be. Mira whimpered softly, a sound like a wounded animal trying not to attract predators. Tyson reached out instinctively and covered her hand with his own, surprised by how small and cold her fingers felt. Through the stalks, he could see shadows moving around his cabin, men positioning themselves at the corners and by the windows. Professional, methodical. This wasn't some random group of cowboys. We're looking for a woman, the voice continued, and now Tyson could place the accent. Texas, probably, with the hard edges that came from too many years enforcing other men's will with fists and firearms. Pretty little thing, dark hair goes. By the name of Mira Travers. Her daddy's powerful worried about her. Hired us to bring her home safe and sound. The lie hung in the air like smoke from a poison fire. Tyson had heard enough stories about Ronan Vega's methods to know that safe and sound was the last thing Mira would be if these men got their hands on her. He'd seen what happened to women who crossed powerful men in this territory. They disappeared, or turned up broken, or learned to keep their mouths shut about what they'd witnessed. Now we heard tell you might have seen something. The voice went on, conversational now, like a man discussing the weather over Sunday dinner. Tracks leading toward your property. Fresh ones. Made by a woman's boots, small and delicate-like. Tyson's mind raced. His cabin sat in a clearing about 200 yards from where they crouched, but the cornfield stretched for acres in every direction. If they could make it to the far edge without being spotted, they might reach the tree line before full dark. From there, it was rough country, canyons and mesas that a man could hide in for months if he knew the terrain. But first, he had to deal with the immediate problem. "I'm going out there," he whispered to Mira, who shook her head frantically. "No, they'll kill you for helping me. You don't understand what Ronan's capable of. I understand plenty." Tyson's voice carried the quiet steel of a man who'd made up his mind. "But if I don't show my face soon, they'll start searching the property. These corn rows won't hide us if they bring torches." The sound of splintering would reach them, his front door giving way under force. Angry voices erupted from inside his cabin as the men discovered it empty, and Tyson knew their time was running short. Soon they'd expand their search, and cornfields that seemed vast in daylight became frighteningly small when determined men came hunting. "Listen to me," he said urgently, gripping Myra's shoulders. "When I stand up and walk out there, you count to 50, then start moving that way." He pointed deeper into the corn, toward the western edge of his property. "Stay low, stay quiet, and whatever you hear happening back here, don't stop. You understand? Don't stop until you reach the rocks. I won't leave you to face them alone. You will, because that's the only way either of us lives through this night." His hands tightened on her shoulders, and she could feel the calluses earned through years of hard work, the strength of a man who'd learned to survive in an unforgiving land. "There's a cave about a mile west of here, hidden behind a stand of aspen trees. Natural spring inside, dry as a bone. You wait there, and if I don't come by sunrise, Tyson." His name on her lips sounded different somehow, intimate and desperate. "I barely know you. Why would you risk everything for a stranger?" The question hung between them in the gathering darkness, and for a moment the sounds of angry men searching his cabin faded into background noise. Why indeed? He could hand her over, claim he'd found her trespassing, collect whatever reward Vega was offering, and go back to his quiet, empty life. It would be the sensible thing, the safe thing. But as he looked into her storm-gray eyes, he saw something that reminded him of Martha in her final days. Not the sickness, but the fierce determination to fight for what mattered, even when the odds were hopeless. Mira Travers was running from something evil, and sometimes a man had to choose which side of a fight he wanted to be on. Because, he said simply, some things are worth the risk. Before she could protest further, he rose from his crouch and stepped out of the corn rows, his hands visible and empty, walking toward his violated cabin with the measured pace of a man who had nothing to hide. "Evening, gentlemen," he called out, his voice carrying clearly across the yard. "Something I can help you with." The leader of the group emerged from Tyson's cabin, and even in the dim light, Mira could see the cruel smile spreading across his weathered face, the expression of a hunter who'd just caught scent of his prey. The man who stepped down from Tyson's porch moved like a predator comfortable in his own skin, tall, lean, with the kind of scars that came from winning fights that other men didn't walk away from. His hat sat low over eyes that glittered with malicious intelligence, and the twin Colts on his hips hung with the easy familiarity of tools used often and well. "Knox Greer," he said by way of introduction, touching the brim of his hat in a mockery of politeness. "I work for Mr. Ronan Vega, and I'm sure you've heard that name before." Tyson kept his expression neutral, though his heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird. Knox Greer's reputation preceded him across 3 territories. A man who collected bounties on the living as efficiently as most men collected them on the dead. They said he could track a whisper across stone and had never failed to bring back what he was hired to find. Can't say I have business with Mr. Vega, Tyson replied evenly. I keep to myself out here. Greer's smile widened, revealing teeth stained yellow from tobacco and something darker. See, that's what makes this interesting, Beck. A man who keeps to himself, living alone on good water and better land, makes a person wonder what you might be hiding in all this privacy. From the shadows around the cabin, 5 other men emerged like wolves answering their pack leader's call. Tyson recognized the type: drifters and hired guns. Men who'd sold their souls for the promise of easy money and the protection of a powerful name. Their faces bore the hard stamp of violence, and their hands rested casual-like near their weapons. We're looking for a woman, Greer continued, circling Tyson with the lazy confidence of a man who held all the cards. Delicate little flower who wandered away from her garden, if you catch my meaning. Her family's real concerned about her welfare. Don't know anything about missing women, Tyson said. Like I told you, I keep to myself. Is that so? Greer stopped directly in front of him, close enough that Tyson could smell the whiskey on his breath and see the cold calculation in his pale blue eyes. Then maybe you can explain why we found fresh tracks leading straight to your property. Small boots, woman-sized. Made sometime this afternoon, I'd reckon. Tyson's blood ran cold, but he kept his voice steady. Could be anyone. Lot of folks pass through this way heading west. Could be, Greer agreed pleasantly. But see, these tracks? They don't pass through. They end right here, at your cornfield. Like maybe someone decided to hide among your crops, waiting for dark to make their next move. One of the other men, a thick-set brute with arms like tree trunks, spat tobacco juice into the dust and grinned. Want me to fire the field, Knox? Smoke out whatever varmints might be hiding in there. The casual suggestion hit Tyson like a physical blow. His corn represented months of back-breaking work, the difference between prosperity and starvation through the coming winter. But more than that, if they burned the field with Mira still hidden inside. Now, Wade, Greer said chidingly. That seems a mite extreme. Mr. Beck here strikes me as a reasonable man. Aren't you reasonable, Beck? The question carried an undertone of threat that made Tyson's skin crawl. He could feel the net closing around him, feel the weight of 6 pairs of hostile eyes measuring him for weakness. Behind him, the corn rustled softly in the evening breeze, and he prayed that Mira had the sense to keep moving toward the tree line. I'm a practical man, Tyson said carefully, always willing to listen to a reasonable proposition. Good, good. Greer nodded approvingly. Here's how I see it. You help us find this lost little lamb, and Mr. Vega shows his appreciation in a substantial way. Say, enough to buy yourself some prime breeding stock, maybe hire a few hands to help work this. Spread properly. The offer hung in the air like poisoned honey. Tyson had to admit it was tempting. Ronan Vega's gold could transform his struggling ranch into something truly prosperous, set him up for life. All he had to do was betray a frightened woman who'd done nothing worse than refuse to marry a monster. And, if I can't help you, he asked. That Greer's smile turned winter cold. Well, that would be unfortunate. Accidents happen out here on the frontier. Fires mostly. Terrible thing, watching a man's life work go up in smoke. Sometimes the owner gets caught in the blaze, too, trying to save what he's built. He gestured toward the cabin, the barn, the fields that represented everything Tyson had worked for. Since Martha's death. Shame to lose all this over a woman you don't even know. The threat was crystal clear, delivered with the casual ease of a man who'd made similar offers before. Tyson felt anger rise in his chest, hot, righteous fury at the injustice of it all. This was his land, bought with honest work and watered with honest sweat. No man had the right to threaten what he'd built, especially not in service to a devil like Ronan Vega. But anger wouldn't stop 6 armed men, and righteous fury was poor protection against bullets. I need a minute to think, Tyson said. Of course, you do. Greer agreed magnanimously. Take all the time you need. Wade here will keep you company while you consider your options. The big man stepped forward, his hand resting meaningfully on the butt of his pistol. The others spread out around the yard, casual-like. But Tyson noticed how they positioned themselves to cover all the escape routes. These weren't amateurs. They'd done this dance before. Tyson walked slowly toward his well, partly to buy time. and partly because his mouth had gone dry as desert sand. The wooden bucket hung on its rope, and he drew up some water, taking a long drink while his mind raced through possibilities. 6 men, all armed, all experienced. Even if he could get to his rifle in the cabin, the odds were hopeless. But as he replaced the bucket, his eyes caught something that made his pulse quicken. There, in the soft earth around the well, were fresh hoof prints, but not from Greer's horses. These were smaller, lighter, with the distinctive wear pattern of a mount that had been ridden hard and fast. Someone else had been here recently, someone who'd watered their horse and left again. He straightened slowly, his mind working furiously. If another rider had passed through earlier, it might explain the tracks Greer's men had found. More importantly, it might provide the distraction he needed to. Time's up, Beck, Greer called out. What's it going to be? Easy money, or a hard lesson in the cost of being stubborn? Tyson turned back toward the group of armed men, his decision crystallizing like ice in winter water. Some things were worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. Some stands had to be taken, regardless of the consequences. But before he could open his mouth to give his answer, a new voice cut through. The evening air, smooth as silk and twice as dangerous, and Tyson's blood turned to ice as he recognized the speaker. Well, Knox, my friend, it seems you found our missing songbird's nest. The voice that sliced through the twilight carried the cultured tones of Eastern education wrapped around a core of absolute ruthlessness. Ronan Vega emerged from the shadows beyond the barn like a gentleman caller arriving for Sunday dinner. If gentlemen callers wore $1,000 suits and left a trail of broken lives in their wake, even in the dim light, Vega commanded attention. Tall and imposing, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes the color of winter ice. He moved with the fluid confidence of a man who'd never met an obstacle he couldn't buy, intimidate, or destroy. His boots, polished leather that probably cost more than most men made in a year, barely whispered against the packed earth as he approached. Behind him came 2 more riders, and Tyson's heart sank as he recognized the type. Not hired guns like Greer's crew, but something worse. Men who killed for pleasure rather than profit, who served Vega out of shared appetite for cruelty rather than simple greed. Mr. Vega, Greer said, touching his hat brim with genuine respect, tinged by fear. Wasn't expecting you to ride out personal like. My bride-to-be has caused me considerable embarrassment, Knox. Vega's voice carried the conversational tone of a man discussing the weather, but underneath lurked something that made Tyson's skin crawl. When a woman runs from Ronan Vega 3 weeks before their wedding, it sends the wrong message to certain business associates. Questions arise about my ability to manage my own affairs. He stopped directly in front of Tyson, close enough that the rancher could smell expensive cologne mixed with something darker, the scent of a predator marking territory. You must be Mr. Beck. I've heard interesting things about you. Can't imagine what, Tyson replied, fighting to keep his voice level. I don't move in your circles. Vega's laugh was cultured and cold. No, indeed. But you see, I make it my business to know everyone who owns property along the proposed railroad route. Fascinating how many holdouts there are. Stubborn men who refuse perfectly reasonable offers for land that will soon be worth 10 times what they paid for it. The implication hit Tyson like a sledgehammer. The railroad. He'd heard rumors about survey teams mapping routes through the territory, but nothing concrete. If Vega was already positioning himself to profit from the railroad's path, of course, Vega continued smoothly. Sometimes those holdouts experience unfortunate accidents. Fires mostly. Or they simply disappear, leaving their property to be sold for back taxes. Tragic, really. What do you want? Tyson asked bluntly. Why? To retrieve my wayward fiancée, naturally. Vega's smile was all sharp edges and malicious intent. Mira has always been spirited. It's one of her more charming qualities. But spirit without proper guidance becomes rebellion, and rebellion. He shrugged eloquently. Well, rebellion must be corrected. From somewhere deep in the cornfield came the faint sound of rustling stalks, and Tyson's blood froze. Please, he thought desperately, let it be the wind. Let it be anything but Mira making noise at the worst possible moment. But Vega's head turned toward the sound like a hunting dog catching scent, and his smile widened with genuine pleasure. Ah, how delightful. She's still here. Could be anything. Tyson said quickly. Coyotes, deer, whined through the Mr. Beck. Vega's voice cut through his words like a blade through silk. I've been tracking that particular woman for 3 days. I know the sound of her breathing, the rhythm of her step, the way she moves when she's frightened. His pale eyes fixed on Tyson with laser intensity. She's in your cornfield, probably no more than 100 yards from where we stand. Greer stepped forward eagerly. Want me to flush her out, boss? Wade here's still got that torch ready. No. Vega raised a hand, his attention never leaving Tyson's face. I think Mr. Beck is going to call her out for us. Aren't you, Mr. Beck? The question hung in the air like a noose waiting for a neck. Tyson could feel the weight of 8 pairs of hostile eyes, could sense the violence coiled and ready to spring at the first sign of defiance. His ranch, his life's work, everything he'd built since Martha's death, all of it balanced on the edge of a knife. Why would I do that? Vega's smile turned genuinely amused. Because, my dear fellow, you're about to learn something fascinating about your property. You see, when I acquired the territorial survey maps last month, I discovered that your little ranch sits directly on top of what will soon be the most valuable real estate in Colorado territory. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded document, spreading it open in the lamplight spilling from Tyson's cabin. Even from a distance, Tyson could see the official seals, the precise lines marking elevation and water rights. The railroad will run right through here, Vega continued, his finger tracing a line that bisected Tyson's property. But not just the railroad, the station, the switching yard, the depot that will serve 3 counties' worth of cattle shipments. His pale eyes glittered with avarice. Conservative estimates put the value at $500,000. Perhaps more. The numbers hit Tyson like physical blows. $500,000. Enough money to buy a dozen ranches, to live like a king for the rest of his life. All he had to do was, of course, Vega said conversationally. If something were to happen to the current owner, if he were to suffer an unfortunate accident or simply disappear, the property would eventually be sold for back taxes. And I happen to have excellent relationships with the men who handle such sales. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about business, Mr. Beck. The removal of obstacles to progress. Vega folded the map with precise, economical movements. But I'm a reasonable man. I'm prepared to offer you a choice. He gestured toward the cornfield where Mira was hidden. Call out my bride. Help me retrieve what belongs to me, and I'll make you a partner in this venture. $50,000 cash, plus a percentage of the railroad profits. Enough to set you up for life. The offer hung between them like poisoned fruit, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. $50,000. More money than Tyson had ever dreamed of possessing. All for betraying a woman he'd known for less than an hour. And if I refuse? Vega's mask of civilized politeness slipped for just a moment, revealing something reptilian. Underneath. Then you'll join the list of unfortunate obstacles that needed removing, along with anyone foolish enough to shelter a runaway bride. But before Tyson could answer, a sound erupted from the cornfield that chilled every man to the bone. The unmistakable scream of a woman in mortal terror, followed by the thunderous roar of something large crashing through the stalks toward them. The grizzly bear that exploded from the cornfield stood nearly 8 feet tall on its hind legs, its massive frame silhouetted against the dying light like some primordial nightmare given flesh. Saliva dripped from yellowed fangs as it roared again, a sound that seemed to shake the very earth and turn men's courage to water in their veins. Behind the beast, Mira stumbled into view, her dress torn and bloodied, clutching a broken corn stalk like a weapon. Her eyes were wild with terror, but underneath the fear burned something fiercer, the desperate cunning of a woman who'd turned her hunter's trap into her salvation. Jesus Christ, Wade bellowed, fumbling for his pistol with hands that shook like autumn leaves. Where the hell did that come from? But Tyson knew. The old sow that denayed up in the rocks beyond his cornfield every winter, the one that had lost cubs to hunters last spring and carried her grief like a loaded weapon. Mira must have stumbled into her territory, and the bear, already agitated by the approaching storm that Tyson could now smell on the wind, had followed the scent of blood and fear back toward the source of disturbance. The grizzly dropped to all fours and charged. What followed was chaos written in gunpowder and screaming. Greer's men scattered like startled quail, some diving for cover behind the water trough, others sprinting for their horses with abandon that would have been comical. Under different circumstances, Wade's first shot went wide, gouging a furrow in the bear's shoulder that only seemed to enrage it further. "The woman!" Vega shouted over the pandemonium, his cultured facade cracking like thin ice. "Get the woman!" But Mira was already moving, using the confusion to sprint toward Tyson. She reached him just as the bear bowled over two of Greer's men, sending them tumbling like scattered pins. Her hand found his, and he could feel the desperate strength in her grip. "The cave," she gasped. "You said there was a cave." Tyson didn't hesitate. While Vega's men wasted precious seconds trying to organize themselves against 800 pounds. A furious grizzly, he pulled Mira toward the edge of the clearing. Behind them, the bear's roars mixed with shouted curses and the sharp crack of rifle fire. They plunged into the cornfield, the tall stalks closing around them like a protective embrace. Tyson led by instinct, his feet finding the familiar paths. Between the rows, even in the gathering darkness. Behind them, the sounds of battle continued. Men shouting, horses screaming, and underneath it all the terrible growls of an animal pushed beyond endurance. "This way," he whispered, pulling her toward the western edge of his property. "Stay low, stay quiet." They moved through the corn like ghosts, the rustling of their passage lost in the greater chaos behind them. Tyson's heart hammered against his ribs, partly from exertion, but mostly from the impossible reality of what was happening. An hour ago, his biggest concern had been mending fence posts. Now he was fleeing into the wilderness with a woman who carried secrets worth killing. "For the bear," Mira gasped as they reached the edge of the field. "I didn't mean. I was trying to get away, and I heard this sound. She's been grieving her cubs," Tyson explained, helping her climb over a fallen log. "Sometimes grief makes creatures dangerous. Sometimes it makes them allies." They reached the aspen grove just as the first fat raindrops began to fall, the storm that had been building all day finally breaking open like a wound. The cave was exactly where Tyson had promised, a narrow opening hidden behind the white-barked trees, invisible unless you knew where to look. Inside, it was dry and surprisingly spacious, carved by ancient waters into a chamber large enough for a dozen people. A natural spring bubbled up from the rock floor, clear and cold, and somewhere in the darkness came the soft flutter of bat wings. Mira collapsed against the cave wall, her chest heaving from exertion and fear. In the dim light that filtered through the entrance, Tyson could see the full extent of her ordeal. Scratches from thorns, mud stains from her flight through the wilderness, and something deeper in her eyes that spoke of trauma no amount of washing could clean. "It's over," he said softly, settling beside her on the cave floor. "They can't track us in this storm, and that bear will keep them busy for hours." She laughed, a sound caught between hysteria and relief. "Over? Tyson, you don't understand. Ronan Vega doesn't give up. He'll burn down half the territory before he admits defeat. Then maybe it's time someone stood up to him." The words surprised him as much as they did her. But sitting in that cave, listening to the rain drum against the earth outside, Tyson felt something he hadn't experienced since Martha's death: purpose. Not just the simple satisfaction of good work well done, but the deeper calling of a man who'd found something worth fighting for. "The railroad maps," Mira said suddenly. "Did you understand what he was showing you? The real reason he wants your land." Tyson nodded grimly. $500,000. Maybe more. "It's not just about money. It's about control." Her voice dropped to a whisper, as if the cave walls themselves might carry her words back to their enemies. "The railroad route, the territorial commissioner's office, the federal land grants. Vega has his fingers in all of it. He's building an empire, and men like you are just obstacles to be removed." Outside, lightning flickered through the cave entrance, followed by the rumble of thunder. The storm was getting worse, which meant they had time to plan, time to think beyond simple survival. "What did you bury back there?" Tyson asked. "In your mother's jewelry box?" Mira was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of secrets too long held. "Evidence," she said simply. "Letters between Ronan and the territorial commissioner. Financial records showing bribes paid to railroad officials. Documentation of every dirty deal, every life destroyed, every law broken in service to his empire." She met his eyes in the dim light. Enough to hang him, if it ever reached the right hands. Then we make sure it does. The promise hung between them like a sacred vow, and as thunder rolled across the valley, Tyson Beck realized his life had just taken a turn towards something he'd never expected. Not just survival, but justice. Not just existence, but purpose. Amira's hand found his in the darkness, and this time her grip was steady, sure. Together, together. Outside, the storm raged with biblical fury, washing the blood from the earth and preparing the ground for whatever would grow from the seeds they'd planted this night. And somewhere in the distance, if you listened carefully, you could hear the first tentative notes of a song that sounded remarkably like hope. Well now, friends, if that tale of love blooming in the darkest hour didn't stir something in your chest, I'd be mighty surprised. Sometimes the strongest roses grow in the rockiest soil, and sometimes the truest love is forged in the hottest fires. If you enjoyed this story of courage conquering cruelty, give it a like and let me know in the comments. And don't forget to tell me where in this wide world you're listening from today.